Robert Hayes stepped out of his sleek black car, the sound of the engine fading into the silence of the cemetery. In his hand, he held a single white rose, its delicate petals trembling slightly in the evening breeze. For the world outside, Robert was a name that symbolized success, power, and unimaginable wealth. Yet in this quiet corner, away from business empires and flashing cameras, he was only a father, broken, grieving, and still searching for a sense of peace he never seemed to find. Each year, he returned to this very spot, where his only son had been laid to rest after the tragic accident that had stolen him away too soon. Money had saved Robert from many losses, but it had been powerless against death, leaving him with nothing but memories and regrets. His footsteps were slow, almost hesitant, as though the ground itself carried the weight of his sorrow. The headstones around him blurred into the background, for his eyes were fixed on one alone, etched with a name that tore through his heart every time he read it. He remembered birthdays filled with laughter, late-night talks, and dreams his son once shared. The silence here was deafening, pressing into him like a reminder of everything he could not change. Robert knelt, placing the rose gently on the grave. For a moment, his confident facade crumbled, his shoulders shaking as he whispered into the wind, asking questions no amount of wealth could ever answer. As Robert straightened himself beside the grave, he noticed something unusual: he was not alone. Just a few steps away, a young woman knelt on the grass, her head bowed, shoulders trembling. Beside her stood a little boy, no older than 5, his tiny hand resting on her arm as though trying to comfort her. Robert froze, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. This was his son's resting place. Why would a stranger be here, crying as if the loss were her own? The woman's quiet sobs carried through the still air, blending with the rustle of leaves. She clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers, nothing fancy, yet placed with such tenderness it made Robert's heart ache. The boy, with wide innocent eyes, looked at the headstone and then up at his mother, clearly sensing her pain though too young to understand. Robert's chest tightened. For years, he had come here alone, drowning in solitude. Now, here was someone mourning just as deeply, but for reasons unknown. He took a cautious step forward, his polished shoes crunching softly against the gravel. The woman looked up, startled, her tear-streaked face meeting his gaze. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed quickly by nervousness, as if she hadn't expected to be seen. Robert's brow furrowed. He opened his mouth, but words failed him. The scene felt surreal: this stranger, this child, their grief interwoven with his own. He wanted to ask why, yet a heavier question pressed against his heart: what connection could they possibly have to his son? The woman quickly wiped her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. She held her child close, almost protectively, and then glanced at Robert with a mixture of hesitation and courage. "Mr. Hayes," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you don't know me, but I knew your son." Robert's breath caught, his eyes narrowing in surprise. Before he could respond, she continued, words spilling out as if held inside for years. She introduced herself as Emily, a waitress who once struggled to survive as a single mother. Years ago, when her little boy was born premature, she had been drowning in hospital bills, fearing she would lose him because she couldn't afford the care he desperately needed. Her voice broke as she recalled the night a quiet young man had stepped into the diner where she worked. He had been kind, unassuming, and after overhearing her desperate phone call to the hospital, he left an envelope behind without a word. Inside was enough money to cover every bill. Emily only discovered his name when she later traced it back: it was Robert's son. With that act of compassion, he had saved both her life and her child's. Emily's gaze dropped to the headstone, her tears returning. "I never got to thank him," she said softly. "So I come here sometimes, to tell my son about the man who gave him a chance to live." Robert stood frozen, his heart pounding, as the truth sank in: his son's kindness had left a legacy he never knew existed. Robert felt his throat tighten, and for the first time in years, tears burned his eyes in a way he couldn't hold back. He had carried the weight of believing his son's life was cut short before it had meant anything. But now, standing before this woman and her child, he realized his son's legacy wasn't written in fortune or fame. It was carved into the lives he quietly touched. His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths as he struggled to steady himself, but the emotions rushed over him like a tide too strong to fight. Emily bent down to comfort her son, but the little boy's eyes had fixed on Robert. With a child's unfiltered innocence, he let go of his mother's hand and stepped closer. Slowly, he wrapped his tiny arms around Robert's legs in a simple, wordless hug. Robert froze, trembling, as the child looked up at him with a gentle smile. "It's okay," the boy whispered, "Mommy says he was a hero." For a moment, Robert could not move. The word hero echoed inside him, breaking the walls he had built around his grief. Robert lowered himself to his knees, placing a shaky hand on the boy's shoulder. The child tilted his head and asked softly, "Are you my grandpa?" The innocence of the question shattered what little control Robert had left. With tears streaming down his face, he pulled the boy into his arms. In that embrace, he felt his son's presence again, alive in the kindness he had left behind. The silence between them softened, no longer heavy with grief but alive with something new, connection. Robert rose to his feet, still holding the boy's small hand, and looked at Emily with eyes that spoke more than words. For years, he had come to this grave seeking closure, but all he ever found was emptiness. Now, standing beside a woman whose life his son had saved, and a child who carried the gift of that kindness, he felt a warmth stir inside his heart that he thought he had lost forever. He cleared his throat, his voice unsteady but gentle. "Would you join me for lunch?" The invitation surprised even him, but Emily's cautious smile told him she understood. They walked together out of the cemetery, a billionaire, a struggling mother, and a little boy who had unknowingly bridged the gap between them. Over the weeks that followed, Robert kept his promise. He became part of their lives. Not as a benefactor flaunting wealth, but as a man who longed to continue his son's legacy. He funded the boy's education, yes, but more importantly, he gave him his time, his guidance, and his love. Slowly, the emptiness that haunted Robert began to fade, replaced by laughter, dinners shared, and the sound of a child calling him grandpa without hesitation. One quiet afternoon, as he returned once more to his son's grave, Robert placed his hand on the headstone and whispered with a tearful smile, "Your kindness lives on, my boy. Through them, and through me."